In this video, we're going to work on Practice Exam 2, problem number 6, which is on activity-based costing. So we have this High-Tech Manufacturing Incorporated makes two types of industrial parts, the B300 and the T500. We're given the absorption costing income statement for the most recent period. We're given the sales of each one of the two products, and we're told that manufacturing overhead is allocated to products using a plant-wide overhead rate and direct labor dollars as the allocation base. Then we're given the materials and the labor for each and the overhead for the total company, not for each one of the products. Then the company has created an ABC costing system to evaluate the profitability of its products. They concluded that $50,000 and $110,000 of the advertising expenses could be directly traced to B300 and T500. The remainder of the selling and administrative expenses was organization sustaining in nature. They also distributed the company's manufacturing overhead to 4 activities as shown below. So our requirements are, number 1, compute the product margins under the traditional costing system. Then we're supposed to compute the product margins under ABC, and then we're supposed to do a quantitative comparison of the traditional and the activity-based cost assignments. So let's get going. First, under our traditional costing system, we have to calculate one overhead application rate. And if you remember from Chapter 2, it's the overhead divided by the application base. In this case, it's direct labor dollars, so our overhead application rate is going to be our overhead, which is $488,424, divided by our direct labor dollars, because we were told that direct labor dollars is the allocation base. So our direct labor dollars, $163,600. Both of those numbers are given right here in the second chart. So if I take $488,424 and I divide by $163,600, I'm going to get an overhead application rate of $2.99 per unit. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to do the calculations for the B300 and the T500. So for each one, what we want to do is we want to take the sales. Actually, I'm only going to need one column there, so I can delete that. We want to take the sales, and then we're going to subtract the materials, the labor, and the overhead. So for the B300, our sales were given as 60,000 units multiplied by 19. That was given in the problem. Right over here, 60,000 times 19. For T500, it was given as 12,800 at 40. The materials and labor were given in the problem for each one right over here. So our materials for B300, 400,100. The direct labor, 120,700. For T500, the materials 162,300 and 42,900 for the labor. Now all we have to do is calculate the overhead. I'll put the commas in to make these numbers a little bit easier to read. Now our rate was given as $2.99 per direct labor dollar, and we have our direct labor dollars for each one of the products. So for the B300, I'm going to take the 120,700 direct labor hours and multiply it by a rate of $2.99 per direct labor dollar. So I'm going to take 120,700, multiply that by $2.99. I get 360,893. And for T500, I'm going to take the labor dollars of 42,900, multiply that by the rate of $2.99. And I'm going to get 128,271. Now all we have to do is subtract to calculate the product margin. So for B300, I'm going to take the sales, subtract the materials, the labor, and the overhead, and I'm going to get 258,307, and for T500, 178,529. Now let's move on to requirement 2 under ABC. Now in requirement 2 under ABC, what we're going to do is we're actually going to calculate 3 overhead rates. So we can see here that we have 4 overhead categories, but the last one is organization sustaining. We see NA, so it's not going to get allocated to the products. So we're going to allocate our machining, and our setup, and our product sustaining overhead. So for each one, what we're going to do is we're going to take the total overhead and just divide it by the total activity on that row. So for our machining overhead rate, we're going to take the machining overhead of 207,944, and we're going to divide that by the total activity on that row, which is machine hours. So I have 152,900 total machine hours. Make sure to get out of the comma column so you can see the total number of decimal points. So I'm going to take 207,944, divide by 152,900, and our machining rate is going to be $1.36 per machine hour. Now for our setup rate, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take the setup overhead, the one in the overhead column, and divide by the total activity, which is still highlighted, of 284 setup hours. So for our setup rate, I'm going to take my setup overhead of 119,280, and I'm going to divide by the total activity on the setup line, 284 setup hours, and again making sure to have my decimal points correct. 119,280 divided by 284, since I have columns C and D set for 0 decimals. We're going to get $420 per setup hour. And finally, we have our product sustaining. So for our product sustaining, we take 100,400 total overhead, and we divide by the total activity, which is 2. So basically, each one is going to get half of the product sustaining overhead, 100,400 divided by 2, and the reason is that we just multiplied by 1 for each in the little activity chart. So now let's calculate our product margins for activity-based costing. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the sales, material, and labor, since they're all going to stay the same. So to save time, I'm going to copy, and I'm going to paste down here. Now we're going to have three different overheads. We're going to have our machining overhead, we're going to have our setup overhead, and we're going to have our product sustaining overhead. So I'll make those columns a little bit wider. And then finally, under ABC, we're also going to deduct those separate advertising costs as well, which are given. So for our machining overhead, from this chart, we can see that B330 had 90,300 machine hours. And we can see that our machining rate is $1.36. T500 had 62,600 machine hours. And once again, our machining overhead rate is $1.36 per machine hour. So I'm going to take 90,300, multiply that by $1.36, and 62,600, multiply that by $1.36. Now we do the setup overhead, where our rate is $4.20 per setup hour. So we were told that B300 had 74 setup hours. So 74 times 420. And we were told that T500 had 210 setup hours. So 210 multiplied by 420. So 74 times 420, and 210 times 420. Next, we had the product sustaining, and we said that each one just get 50,200. Each one would have 50,200 multiplied by 1. So 50,200, 50,200. And then finally, the advertising costs that were given, 50 and 110. Now, under ABC, to calculate our product margins, we're just going to take the sales and subtract all of the remaining costs. So sales minus the materials, minus the labor, minus the machining overhead, minus the setup overhead, minus the product sustaining overhead, and minus the advertising. So 365, 112, and 26736 loss. So to put that into the question, going into requirement number 2, B300, 365, 112, positive margin, and then negative 26736. Oh, I just typed that in. Incorrectly, I typed in 362 instead of 365. That should be 365, 112. And now we have that correct. Now let's move on to requirement number 3. So in requirement number 3, we're supposed to do a cost reconciliation between our traditional costing system and our activity-based costing system. So let us go ahead and let us do that. So under our traditional costing system, you can see here that our total costs are going to be comprised of our materials, labor, and overhead. So we're going to have our materials, we're going to have our direct labor, and we're going to have our manufacturing overhead. So you can see we've calculated all of those amounts for 100,100, 120,700, and 360,893 for the B300. Those are the three numbers right here under our traditional costing system. And for the T500, 162,300, 42,900, excuse me, and 128,271. Now, what it's going to want us to do, I'll just pull out on the side here a little bit, is calculate our totals and then our percent of totals. So I'm just going to go down below, and I am going to do that. So for materials, I'm going to add 400,100 plus 162,300. So that total is 562,400. Now I'm going to take each number and divide by 562,400. So I'm going to take 400,100, divide by 562,400, and I get 71.1%. And here I'm going to take 162,300, and I'm going to divide by 562,400, and I'm going to get 28.9%. Now I'm going to do the same thing for labor. So for labor, I'm going to add 120,700 plus 42,900, and I'm going to get a total of 163,600. Now I'm going to take the total, percent of total for each. So 120,700 divided by 163,600 gives me 73.8%. And for the T500, I'm going to take 42,900 and divide by the total of 163,600, and I'm going to get 26.2%. Now, for the third one, I don't need these calculations anymore. For the third one, manufacturing overhead, I'm going to take 360,893. I'm going to add 128,271, and I'm going to get a total of 489,164. Now, once again, I'm going to take a percentage of each. So for B300, 360,893 divided by 489,164, and I'm going to get 73.8%. And here I'm going to take 128,271, and I'm going to divide by 489,164, and since they're proportional, I should get the same 26.2%. Now, after the total costs assigned to products under a traditional costing system, I'm just going to subtract my selling and administrative expenses. My selling and administrative expenses are given in the income statement as $630,000. So I have my total costs under a traditional costing system, 1,845,164. Now let's scroll up, and here are all of the costs under my activity-based costing system. Under my activity-based costing system, my costs, direct costs, are the direct materials, the direct labor, and also we have the advertising cost is now also a direct cost. Under our indirect costs, we're going to have the machining overhead, the setup overhead, and the product sustaining overhead. Now, once again, we have all of those numbers here, and some of the percentages we've already calculated up above. So our materials are still 400,100. For T500, there's still 162,300. The total is still 562,400, and the percentages stay at 71.1 and 28.9. Now for direct labor, the numbers are still 120,700 with a percentage of 73.8 and 42,900, just copying from above, with a percentage of 26.2, with a total direct labor 163,600. Now copying from the right, advertising is 50,000, 110,000. So 50 plus 110,000 gives me 160,000. So now I'm going to take 50,000 divided by 160,000, and I'm going to get 0.3125, so 31.3%. And I'm going to take 110,000 and divide by 160,000, and I'm going to get 68.75%, so 68.8%. Now we've already calculated the two machining, 122,808 and 85,136. We've calculated the two setups as 31080 and 88,200. And finally, we have our product sustaining as 50,200 and 50,200. Wrong cell. Now I'm going to calculate the percentages for each exactly the same way. So for machining, I'm going to take 122,808. I'm going to add 85,136 and get 207,944. And then take each one and divide by 207,944. So I'm going to take 122,808 and divide by 207,944, and I'm going to get 59.1%. And here I'm going to take 85,136 and divide by 207,944, and I'm going to get 40.9%. I actually think I'm going to do the next ones a little bit different. So I don't have to, well, actually it's only one more time. So here I'm going to take 31080, add 88,200, and I'm going to get a total of 119,280. So here I'm going to take 31080 and divide by 119,280. I'm going to get 26.1%. And here I'm going to take 88,200 and I'm going to divide by 119,280 and I'm going to get 73.9%. And finally, 50,200 and 50,200 is going to give me 100,400. And each one is exactly 50%. So 50.0 and 50.0. I don't want to put in any typos in this. Now that we have the total costs, now we have to have the cost not assigned to products. And the cost not assigned to products is going to be our selling and administrative. But here we have to be extremely careful because we started off with 630,000, but then we assigned 160,000 of that. So if I take the 630,000 total, selling and administrative expenses before the assignment, subtract out the 50,000, and subtract out the 110,000 in advertising expenses, we're going to find out that we actually have 470,000 of selling and administrative expenses under ABC. The final cost we have that's not assigned to products is this other organization sustaining costs of 60,800. So under the selling and administrative, we have our other which again going up to our other $60,800. And our answer is complete and correct.